Think about the last time someone walked into a room and immediately captured everyone's attention without saying very much. It wasn't necessarily because they were the loudest person. It wasn't because they were physically imposing or dressed more expensively than everyone else. There was simply something about them that made people instinctively pay attention. They carried themselves differently. They didn't seem desperate to be liked. They didn't appear anxious about fitting in. They projected a quiet certainty that made others adjust their behavior around them. This is where respect truly begins. Most people believe respect is something earned from others, as though it exists outside themselves. They spend years trying to impress people, seeking approval, proving their intelligence, demonstrating their value, hoping that eventually someone will recognize their worth. But psychology reveals something far more interesting. Before people decide how much they respect you, they first observe how much you appear to respect yourself. Human beings are constantly making unconscious calculations. Within moments of meeting someone, the brain begins searching for clues. Does this person trust themselves? Do they seem comfortable in their own identity? Are they trying too hard to win acceptance? These questions are rarely asked consciously, yet they shape every interaction. This is why insecurity has such a powerful effect on social dynamics. Insecurity leaks through behavior in ways we rarely notice ourselves. It appears in excessive explanations, unnecessary apologies, nervous laughter, constant agreement, and the relentless need for reassurance. None of these behaviors are inherently wrong. We all experience moments of uncertainty. The problem begins when insecurity becomes your default language. People instinctively trust what you communicate without words. If your actions suggest that you are uncertain about your own value, others often accept that judgment without questioning it. They assume you know yourself better than they do. This is not because people are cruel. It is because human beings are social creatures wired to read confidence as a signal of competence and stability. Throughout history, survival often depended on recognizing individuals capable of making sound decisions under pressure. Our minds still carry remnants of that ancient programming today. Notice something fascinating about individuals who naturally command respect. They rarely chase it. They don't walk into every conversation trying to prove they are intelligent or important. Instead, they allow their presence to speak before their words ever do. That quiet confidence is not arrogance. In fact, arrogance is often the disguise insecurity wears when it becomes desperate to hide itself. Arrogant people constantly compare themselves to others because they need validation to maintain their fragile self-image. Genuine confidence requires no comparison. It has nothing to defend because it is built internally rather than borrowed from external approval. This distinction changes everything. When your identity depends on how people respond to you, every conversation becomes a performance. Every disagreement feels like a threat. Every criticism becomes deeply personal. You become emotionally controlled by the opinions of strangers. But when your sense of worth comes from your own standards, something remarkable happens. You become psychologically difficult to manipulate. People can disagree with you without destroying your confidence. People can ignore you without diminishing your value. People can criticize you without defining your identity. This kind of emotional independence is incredibly rare, which is exactly why it commands respect. The philosopher once observed that no person has the power to insult you without your permission. At first glance, this seems unrealistic. Words can certainly hurt, but beneath that statement lies an important psychological truth. Most emotional pain comes not from what others say, but from the meaning we attach to it. When your identity is fragile, every negative opinion feels like proof that your deepest fears are true. When your identity is stable, criticism becomes information rather than condemnation. This is why developing self-respect is not an exercise in positive thinking. It is an exercise in disciplined self-awareness. Ask yourself difficult questions. Do I keep promises to myself? Do I tolerate treatment from others that I secretly resent? Do I sacrifice my values simply to avoid conflict? Do I constantly seek permission before making decisions? Every time you ignore your own standards, you quietly teach yourself that your boundaries are optional. Over time, other people begin to treat those boundaries the same way. Respect cannot exist where self-betrayal becomes a habit. Many people misunderstand boundaries. They imagine boundaries are walls built to control other people. In reality, boundaries are promises you make to yourself. They define what you will accept and what you will peacefully walk away from. Notice the difference. Confident people do not threaten others into respecting them. They simply refuse to participate in situations that consistently diminish their dignity. There is tremendous psychological power in this approach because it removes the need for endless confrontation. Instead of demanding respect through force, you communicate it through consistency. People quickly learn that your standards are not negotiable. This consistency creates predictability, and predictability creates trust. Ironically, people often respect those who occasionally disappoint them more than those who constantly try to please them. Why? Because the person who always says yes appears controlled by external approval, while the person capable of saying no demonstrates control over themselves. Control over yourself is the deepest form of authority, not control over others, not domination, not intimidation. Simply mastery over your own emotions, impulses, and decisions. This is the foundation upon which every lasting relationship is built, whether in business, leadership, friendship, or family. People feel safe around individuals who possess inner stability because they know those individuals won't collapse under pressure or abandon their principles for temporary comfort. Developing this stability requires patience. It is not created through motivational slogans or pretending to feel confident. It grows each time you keep your word, each time you face discomfort without running from it, each time you choose integrity over immediate approval. These small decisions accumulate until confidence is no longer something you perform. It becomes part of who you are. And once that transformation occurs, people notice, not because you announce it, not because you demand recognition, but because certainty has a presence that cannot be imitated for long. Before you ever learn how to influence others, negotiate effectively, or command a room, you must first master the silent conversation taking place within yourself. Because the respect you receive from the world rarely rises higher than the respect you consistently give yourself. The moment you stop asking the world to confirm your worth is the moment the world begins to recognize it. Once you've established a foundation of genuine self-respect, something interesting begins to happen. The internal transformation inevitably starts expressing itself externally. You no longer need to convince people that you deserve respect because your behavior quietly communicates it before your words ever have the chance. This is where most people underestimate the psychology of first impressions. They assume respect is earned only after long conversations, shared experiences, or impressive achievements. But the human mind doesn't work that way. Long before anyone evaluates your intelligence, your skills, or your character, they have already formed an emotional impression of your presence. This happens within seconds. The brain is designed to make rapid judgments. It scans for subtle patterns that answer a simple question. Is this person confident, stable, and worthy of attention, or are they uncertain and seeking validation? The fascinating part is that these judgments are rarely based on what you say. They are based on how you say it, and, even more importantly, how you carry yourself before you say anything at all. This is why presence matters more than performance. Many people spend years polishing their vocabulary, rehearsing clever responses, and trying to sound intelligent. Yet they overlook the silent language that people instinctively trust more than words. Human beings have evolved to detect inconsistency. When your body communicates anxiety while your mouth communicates confidence, people believe your body every time. Think about the individuals who naturally command a room. They rarely rush. They don't fidget constantly. They don't fill every moment of silence with unnecessary conversation. Their movements appear deliberate rather than hurried, their posture relaxed rather than rigid, and their attention focused rather than scattered. This is not an accident. Calmness has always been associated with strength. In nature, the most dangerous predator is rarely the most frantic. It conserves energy, it observes, it moves with intention. Human psychology still responds to this pattern. A person who remains composed under pressure unconsciously signals that they possess resources, mental, emotional, or social, that others may not. This explains why emotional control is one of the strongest indicators of perceived authority. Imagine two people receiving criticism in front of a group. One immediately becomes defensive, interrupts, raises their voice, and begins explaining themselves. The other listens carefully, pauses before responding, and answers without visible frustration. Which individual appears stronger? Most people would instinctively choose the second, not because they were necessarily right, but because they demonstrated control over themselves. The inability to regulate emotion often communicates vulnerability. It tells observers that your emotional state can be manipulated by external events. Once people recognize that your reactions are predictable, they also recognize that your behavior can be influenced. This is why emotionally reactive individuals often lose influence without realizing it. Every visible overreaction becomes information. It teaches people exactly where your insecurities exist. The ancient philosophers understood this long before modern psychology gave it scientific language. They argued that freedom begins when your emotional life is no longer dictated by circumstances beyond your control. In practical terms, this means refusing to let every criticism, every disagreement, and every inconvenience determine your state of mind. Composure is not the absence of emotion, it is the mastery of emotion. This distinction matters because many people confuse emotional control with emotional suppression. They believe commanding respect means becoming cold, distant, or expressionless. In reality, genuine confidence allows you to experience emotion without becoming controlled by it. You acknowledge frustration without exploding. You experience fear without surrendering to it. You feel uncertainty without broadcasting it to everyone around you. This emotional discipline creates psychological gravity. Others naturally orient themselves toward individuals who appear centered because stability is deeply reassuring in an unpredictable world. Another silent signal that dramatically shapes respect is eye contact. Eye contact is more than a social habit. It is an evolutionary conversation. Looking away too quickly often communicates uncertainty, while staring aggressively communicates dominance without wisdom. The balance lies in relaxed, steady attention. When you genuinely listen instead of merely waiting for your turn to speak, your eye contact changes naturally. It becomes less about proving confidence and more about demonstrating presence. Presence is extraordinarily rare today. Most conversations involve two people thinking about themselves while pretending to listen to each other. They rehearse responses before the other person has even finished speaking. They interrupt. They search for opportunities to impress rather than opportunities to understand. Ironically, one of the fastest ways to gain respect is to become fully attentive. People remember how you made them feel far longer than they remember the specific words you used. When someone feels truly heard, they instinctively associate you with intelligence, patience, and confidence. The paradox is that saying less often increases your influence. Silence makes many people uncomfortable. They rush to fill empty space because silence feels like failure. But silence has remarkable psychological power. It creates anticipation. It allows your words to carry greater weight. It demonstrates that you are not speaking simply to reduce your own anxiety. Notice how inexperienced speakers often explain every idea repeatedly, hoping more words will produce greater understanding. Yet experienced leaders frequently do the opposite. They make a clear point, stop speaking, and allow the silence to do part of the work. People lean in, they think, they remember. Scarcity creates value even in conversation. The same principle applies to your voice. Confidence rarely announces itself through volume. It reveals itself through steadiness. Speaking slightly slower than your anxiety demands communicates thoughtfulness. It suggests that your ideas deserve time rather than urgency. When people rush their speech, they often reveal an unconscious fear that they might lose attention. Ironically, rushing usually causes the very outcome they hope to avoid. Calm pacing invites people to follow your thinking instead of chasing your words. Every movement, every pause, every expression contributes to an invisible narrative. The question is whether that narrative reflects intention or insecurity. Most people never examine these signals because they assume communication begins when they start talking. In truth, communication begins the moment someone notices your presence. This does not mean creating an artificial persona. Authenticity remains essential. Pretending to be confident eventually collapses under pressure because performance requires constant maintenance. Instead, your external behavior should become a natural extension of the internal discipline we explored earlier. When self-respect exists within you, your posture changes naturally. Your voice becomes steadier. Your reactions become more measured. Your silence becomes comfortable. Your attention becomes genuine. People begin responding differently, not because you've learned tricks, but because you've removed the behaviors that quietly communicated insecurity. Influence has always depended less on what people hear and more on what they perceive. And perception is shaped long before the first sentence leaves your mouth. The strongest presence in any room is rarely the loudest voice. It is the person whose calm cannot be borrowed, whose attention cannot be distracted, and whose confidence does not require constant display. Master your silent signals, and your presence will begin speaking long before your words ever need to. Once you've built genuine self-respect and learned to communicate confidence through your presence, there is one final lesson that determines whether that respect lasts or slowly disappears. It is the ability to become someone who cannot be easily manipulated, intimidated, or undervalued. This is where many people lose everything they have worked to build. Respect is not maintained by constantly reminding others of your worth. It is maintained by consistently demonstrating that your principles are stronger than your desire for approval. The moment people realize they can control your decisions through guilt, flattery, fear, or validation, the balance of power quietly shifts. They no longer see someone guided by conviction. They see someone guided by emotion. Human relationships are filled with subtle power dynamics. Most of them are not malicious. They are simply part of how people navigate social life. Every interaction contains an unspoken question: who is defining the emotional direction of this conversation? The person who constantly reacts gives away influence. The person who responds with intention keeps it. That difference may seem small, but over months and years it shapes how others perceive you. People naturally test boundaries. Sometimes they interrupt repeatedly. Sometimes they make subtle jokes at your expense. Sometimes they ask for more than they know is reasonable. Often they aren't consciously trying to disrespect you. They are simply discovering where your limits are. The important question is not whether people will test your boundaries. They will. The real question is how you respond when they do. Many people believe standing up for themselves requires aggression. They imagine respect is earned through intimidation, arguments, or dramatic confrontations. But lasting respect rarely grows from emotional displays. It grows from quiet consistency. Consider someone who calmly says, "I'm not comfortable with that," and then refuses to negotiate against their own values. There is no anger, no raised voice, no attempt to humiliate the other person. Just clarity. Clarity is incredibly powerful because it removes confusion. People may disagree with your standards, but they quickly learn that your standards are real. This is one of the most overlooked principles of influence. Every time you compromise your core values simply to avoid discomfort, you teach people that your boundaries can be negotiated. They remember that, and once a pattern has been established, it becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. Consistency is what transforms boundaries into reputation. Reputation, in many ways, is accumulated behavior. It is not what you say about yourself. It is what people repeatedly observe. If they observe that you always abandon your principles under pressure, that becomes your reputation. If they observe that you remain composed, fair, and firm regardless of circumstances, that also becomes your reputation. Over time, people stop testing those who have consistently demonstrated emotional discipline. There is another trap that quietly destroys respect, and it is the constant pursuit of approval. Approval is comforting, respect is enduring. The problem is that these two goals often lead in opposite directions. When your primary objective is to be liked, you begin making decisions based on other people's immediate reactions. You hesitate to express disagreement. You avoid difficult conversations. You apologize when no apology is necessary. Gradually, you lose contact with your own judgment because every decision passes through the filter of, "Will they still like me?" But respect asks a different question. Is this consistent with who I choose to be? That shift changes everything. Ironically, many of the people most respected throughout history were not universally liked. They challenged assumptions, they disappointed expectations, they refused to betray their principles for temporary acceptance. This does not mean becoming difficult or argumentative. Wisdom knows when to compromise and when to remain firm. Maturity recognizes that not every disagreement deserves a battle. The key is understanding the difference between flexibility and surrender. Flexible people adjust their methods. Weak people abandon their values. The distinction is subtle but profound. Another essential habit is learning when to walk away. Walking away is often misunderstood as defeat. In reality, it is frequently the highest expression of self-respect. Not every argument deserves your energy. Not every opportunity deserves your attention. Not every relationship deserves unlimited access to your life. One of the greatest signs of emotional maturity is recognizing that your peace has value. People who fear being alone often remain in environments that slowly diminish them. They tolerate constant disrespect because they believe losing the relationship would be worse than losing themselves. But psychology repeatedly shows that people who possess healthy independence make stronger decisions. They negotiate better, they lead more effectively, they recover from setbacks more quickly because their identity is not dependent on external validation. Freedom begins the moment you realize that loneliness is temporary, but self-betrayal leaves lasting consequences. This independence also changes how you approach success. Instead of trying to appear impressive, you focus on becoming genuinely competent. Competence creates quiet confidence because it eliminates the need for exaggeration. People who truly master their craft rarely advertise it endlessly. Their work speaks for them. This is why consistency always outperforms charisma over the long term. Charisma attracts attention. Character sustains respect. Anyone can create a powerful first impression. Far fewer people can maintain integrity when no one is watching. Your daily habits become your silent biography. Every promise you keep, every responsibility you fulfill, every difficult conversation you handle with composure, every temptation you resist. These moments seem insignificant individually, but together they shape the person you become. Eventually, people stop responding to isolated actions and begin responding to your identity. They know what to expect from you. They trust your word. They believe your actions because your history supports them. That is one of the highest forms of influence a human being can possess. Not influence built on fear, not influence built on manipulation, influence built on reliability. When people know that your values are not for sale, your emotions are not easily controlled, and your standards remain steady regardless of circumstances, something remarkable happens. They begin treating you differently, not because you demanded respect, not because you forced it, but because your behavior quietly convinced them that respecting you is the natural response. In the end, respect is never a single moment. It is the cumulative result of thousands of ordinary decisions made consistently over time. It is built every time you choose discipline over impulse, integrity over convenience, purpose over approval, calm over reaction, and perhaps the greatest realization of all is this: the people who become impossible to manipulate are not those who try to control everyone around them. They are the ones who have learned to govern themselves. When you master yourself, you no longer spend your life chasing respect, defending your worth, or proving your value. Your character becomes your strongest argument, your consistency becomes your reputation, and your quiet confidence becomes the standard by which others measure you. ***, the world ultimately respects those who refuse to negotiate with their own principles, because nothing is more powerful than a person who cannot be persuaded to abandon who they are. ***.